The afternoon sun slanted low across the dusty street of Redemption Hollow, painting the weathered facades of wooden buildings in harsh gold. A breeze whipped dust motes into the light, carrying the distant clang of horses' hooves and the faint murmur of voices. Behind the swinging doors of the Silver Spur Saloon, Amarise Calloway felt each tremor of sound rattle through her chest as she pressed her back against the polished bar. She was the saloon's newcomer, hired only a fortnight ago, quietly sweeping floors and serving sarsaparilla to midday travelers. Her copper hair fell in a loose braid over her shoulder, the color of a dying ember. Her pale green eyes, wide with nerves, scanned the room as she arranged empty glasses. She had never imagined Redemption Hollow would feel so alien. In Silver Hollow, the ranches had been quiet, the few travelers respectful. But here, the outlaws, who drifted in from Cedar Ridge and outlying trails, treated women with contempt, especially women in skirts. Amarise's heart pounded when she heard the low, mocking laughter over her shoulder. "Well, if it ain't the little fairy," drawled one of the newcomers. He was tall and lean, face weather-beaten under a black Stetson, the brim casting shadows over his greedy eyes. He lounged at the bar with 3 companions, each bearing the scarred look of men accustomed to violence. They had swaggered in an hour ago, hot-looking guns slung low at their hips, tossing gaudy coins on the bar like they owned the place. Amarise forced a polite smile as she slid a fresh glass of water toward Old Man Beckett. His hands trembled, and she knew he needed a steady hand more than anyone here. "Get her, Colt," the Stetson man barked, voice thick with ale. "Pour yourself a drink, sweetheart. You look paler than a bleached bone." Amarise's pulse raced. She tilted the glass, careful to keep her hands steady, though embroidery on her blouse itched at her skin. She drew in a breath to speak, but the outlaw laughed and waved her off. "Aw, let her be," sneered another, the one called Reed. "She ain't worth the spit on my boot." They swaggered toward her. Amarise's fingers recoiled. There was a time she might have fled, heart thundering. But Silver Spur Saloon had been her refuge all these weeks, a place where she could, at least, blend in quietly behind the bar. Now they threatened to shatter that comfort. Inside her chest, fear coiled like a rattlesnake, but something sturdier held something born of every dusty sunrise and late-night chore she had endured since childhood. She thought of her mother's final instructions: keep your head down. Stay kind. One day, be brave. The outlaw known as Colt leaned in, his breath sour with whiskey. "Scared, little missy?" Amarise's eyes snapped up. In that jagged moment, her internal voice soft and clear spoke. "You are not alone." Before she could retreat, a firm voice cut through the mockery. "Back off." Amarise froze as the saloon's doors burst open, and in strode a man whose mere presence seemed to swallow light. His duster was threadbare, but his shoulders bore a confidence older than any etched ourselves. A battered hat hid his eyes in shadow, and the man's boots hit the wooden floor with the measured calm of a predator. The outlaws turned in unison, lips curling into taunts. "Look who's here." "They've sent the hired muscle to rescue the little nanny," sneered Reed. The man didn't respond. He took a single step forward, eyes narrowing on the outlaw's taunting face. Amarise watched from the edge of the bar, heart in her throat. He moved with a purpose, never hurried, never careless. When he spoke, brass clinked softly at his hip, the only warning before his voice cut through the saloon like steel. "I suggest you apologize to the lady." Silence snapped into place. Reed's pistol twitched, but the stranger was already lowering his hand, leather flexing around the grip of a Colt peacemaker. Amarise felt her breath catch, or what? Colt sneered, stepping nearer. The stranger's voice was quiet, but it carried. "Or you'll learn why folks call me the Midnight Wraith." A round of laughter shattered the hush, until a bullet slammed into the post behind Colt, splintering wood. The outlaw froze, eyes wide as the man in the duster holstered his revolver with deliberate slowness. A hush fell over the saloon. Every patron turned, awed. Amarize's knees threatened to give out. The man's gaze shifted to Amarize for the first time, softening with recognition of her terror. "Miss, are you hurt?" Her voice caught in her throat. She shook her head, unable to speak. He offered a hand, but she scarcely noticed as he pivoted back toward the outlaws. "I give you one chance," he said, voice low. "Walk out that door, now." Colt's face flushed red with fury. He reached for his gun, but the midnight wraith drew with a speed that blurred vision. A single shot rang out. Colt toppled backward, crimson blossoming on his shirt. The other outlaws scrambled, fear replacing arrogance. Reed shouted curses, but the gunslinger had already holstered and turned back to Amarize. Her breath was ragged. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling as tears blurred her sight. He offered a gentle nod. Just as she felt her knees weaken, the saloon doors crashed open again. In alone rode two riders, their faces hidden by wide-brimmed hats. They dismounted, boots thudding heavily. One nudged the other, pointing toward the collapsed outlaw by the bar. Amarize's heart seized. The gunslinger's hand dropped to his revolver again. The new arrivals advanced, slow smiles rippling across their lips. Amarize swallowed, her throat dry. Fear pooled inside her, no longer cold and distant, but immediate. He looked back at her, eyes fierce. "Stay behind me." But as he moved to intercept the newcomers, Colt's suffocated groan rumbled through the saloon. He was stirring. The outlaw's eyes flickered open, pain contorting his features. Amarize's breath caught. The gunslinger paused mid-step. He exchanged a glance with Amarize, then turned back toward Colt, pistol still unholstered. A roar of fury and fear erupted as Colt lunged for his own gun. The midnight wraith fired a single shot, and Colt collapsed again. The riders at the door froze. The gunslinger's shadow stretched long on the floor, a promise of what would come next. Amarize pressed a hand to her mouth, her heart pounding so fiercely she thought she might scream. And then the prop-lifted saloon door creaked behind the riders. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." The saloon door shuddered as the two new riders stepped fully into the lamplight, boots leaving wet prints on the floorboards where the late afternoon rain had started to pour. The smell of the storm drifted in behind them, mingling with the poison. Sharp tang of gunpowder and sweat. Amarize Calloway, pressed against the bar, felt the fine hairs at her nape stand on end. The midnight wraith, whose name alone had sent the first outlaws stumbling, shifted his stance, angling his body protectively between Amarize and the new threat. He hadn't reholstered his revolver. Instead, the barrel hung low at his side, his fingers flexing against the grip in a way that made Amarize's breath catch. He didn't look back at her. He didn't need to. It was clear to everyone watching that his attention was everywhere at once. The taller of the two newcomers peeled off his hat with a slow, mocking flourish. He had a face half hidden by a ragged beard, but the glint in his eyes was unmistakable. Trouble had walked through the door, and it liked what it saw. His partner, a wiry man with a permanent sneer, leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, eyes flicking from Amarize to the wraith and back again. "Well now," the bearded man drawled. "Word gets around fast. Didn't expect to see the great midnight wraith babysitting a saloon girl." A hush fell across the saloon. The few lingering patrons shrank further into the shadows. Old man Beckett, who'd been half asleep with a whiskey glass clutched in his hand, set it down and stared at the floor. Amarize could hear her own heartbeat, loud as hoofbeats. "You know who I am," the wraith said. His voice was a low scrape. A flint against stone. "No theatrics, no arrogance, just fact. Reckon I do," the bearded one replied. He spread his hands, making a show of peace. A legend, come to life. But legend or not, you done shot one of my boys. Colt, still bleeding where he'd collapsed near the bar, let out a muffled curse. Amerise's breath caught in her throat at the sight of the blood pooling beneath him. He chose his fate, the wraith said. He took a step forward. The floor creaked. Same choice you have now. Turn around. Walk out. The wiry man against the doorframe chuckled. Walk out? There's 5 more of us out front. You think you'll get the drop on all of us? Something shifted in the wraith's posture. Amarise couldn't name it, only that the air seemed to grow heavier, more dangerous. He didn't speak. Didn't blink. Just stood there, a living shadow waiting to strike. The bearded man's grin faltered. He stepped closer, boots scraping across broken glass. His eyes darted to Amarise then. Back to the wraith. Pretty thing, ain't she? He jerked his chin at Amarise. Shame to see her all shook up. Maybe we'll be gentle with her once we're done with you. The words hung there like a rattler's hiss. Amarise felt her cheeks flush with heat and fear. She wanted to vanish into the floorboards. The wraith didn't move, but his gun hand twitched, a ghost of a movement that made the wiry man flinch. You speak like a man who doesn't understand consequences, the wraith murmured. The bearded man laughed, but it was forced. Consequences? You're one man against a pack. He glanced at his partner. Reckon we teach him why packs hunt lone wolves, huh, Jesse? The wiry man Jesse pushed off the doorframe, hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip. The air in the saloon thickened. Amarise felt her throat close up. She could see it in the wraith's eyes. He was counting heartbeats, tracking every twitch in Jesse's fingers, the tightening of the bearded man's jaw. Then Jesse lunged. A shot. Cracked. The world seemed to hang still for a breathless instant. Amarise saw Jesse stumble backward, a red blossom opening on his shoulder. The wraith hadn't even lifted his revolver to eye level, just fired from the hip, precise as a surgeon's. Blade. Jesse crashed against the wall, clutching his wound and gasping. The bearded man snarled, rage overtaking his fear. He grabbed for his pistol, but the wraith was already moving 2 quick strides. Then he slammed his shoulder into the canvas man's chest. They crashed into a table, splintering it to kindling. Amarise's knees gave out. She sank behind the bar, hands pressed over her ears as gunfire exploded again. Shouts and curses blurred together. A bottle shattered somewhere overhead, raining glass onto her braid. When she dared peek up, the bearded man was sprawled across the floor, groaning, his gun skittered uselessly away. The wraith stood over him, chest heaving, revolver still steady. Your boys outside, he rasped. Call them in. I'll send them out the same way. The bearded man spat blood. You're dead. You hear me? You and your little whore. The click of the hammer being cocked silenced him. The wraith's voice was ice. Call them in, or I'll start with you. Outside, boots shuffled on the boardwalk. A voice called through the half-swinging doors, hesitant. Boss? Everything all right in there? Amarise's pulse thudded painfully. She forced herself to stand, just enough to see over the bar. The wraith's eyes flicked to hers for a fraction of a heartbeat, and she understood. He needed her. Needed someone to watch his back while the front door stayed unguarded. Swallowing her terror, she reached under the bar. Her fingers brushed cold iron, a coach gun, double-barreled, loaded and waiting. She'd seen old Beckett keep it there for rowdy drunks, but she'd never dreamed she'd touch it herself. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, bracing it on the bar top, barrels pointed toward the swinging doors. Her breath fogged in the lamplight. Outside, boots thudded closer. Boss? The voice came again, more wary now. The door pushed open wider. 2 figures loomed against the stormy dusk, guns already drawn. The bearded man wheezed a laugh from the floor. You're finished now. Hope you said your prayers, wraith. The wraith didn't turn, didn't flinch. His shadow stretched across the saloon floor, long and still. Amarai saw his lips move words she couldn't hear over the pounding in. Her ears, she steadied her aim. Her father's voice came to her, from all those years ago on their lonely homestead. Don't let them see you shake. Even if your knees knock like a barn door in a windstorm. The first outlaw stepped through the door. His eyes met hers, surprise flashing across his face at the sight of the timid saloon girl braced behind a shotgun. Drop it. Amarais croaked, her voice raw. Drop your guns and go. Or you'll get the same. A pause long enough to feel like eternity. Then the outlaw sneered. Sweetheart, you ain't gonna. The wraith moved like a storm breaking free. His revolver barked twice, impossibly fast. The first man spun, his pistol dropping from numb fingers. The second ducked aside, firing wildly, splinters flying. From the bar, Amarais squeezed the triggers. The shotgun roared, deafening, knocking her back against the shelves. Smoke and thunder swallowed the room. When her ears stopped ringing, Amarais found herself staring at the chaos she'd wrought. One man sprawled across the doorway, another crawling away, shrieking at the ruin of his leg. The wraith stood at the center of it all, his chest heaving, his revolver lowered but not holstered. Slowly he turned back to Amarais. You did good, he said, voice hoarse but sure. Stay behind the bar. There'll be more. Amarais's hands shook as she fumbled to reload the shotgun. Glass crunched under his boots as he moved to the door. Outside, the storm raged. Distant hoofbeats echoed on the main street. The wraith looked back once more, a glint of something almost like pride in his eyes. Stay ready, Amarais. This town's worth fighting for. She nodded, knuckles white on the shotgun's grip. Out there in the rain, shadows gathered, drawn by blood and the legend now awake again inside these walls. She knew then that the fight had only just begun. Rain hammered the tin roof of the Silver Spur Saloon, drumming out a steady tattoo that mingled with the sharp scent of gunpowder and the coppery tang of blood. Amarais Calloway's shoulders ached from the weight of the coach gun braced against them, but her trembling fingers stayed tight on the barrels. She could hear the midnight wraith's boots pacing near the batwing doors, each measured step a promise that he would not be caught off guard. Beyond those doors, Redemption Hollow seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere out in the murk of the storm, more outlaws lurked, emboldened by the news that the man they'd mocked, the legend they'd thought long buried, was flesh and blood once again. Keep your head down, Amarais. The wraith's voice carried back to her, low and steady. Watch the corners. They'll come at us like wolves testing a fence. She peered over the bar, the coach gun propped between two broken bottles. Rainwater seeped under the saloon doors, pooling in dark streaks across the warped floorboards. Shadows danced in the doorway, flickers of movement that might have been tricks of the lamplight or the outlaws gathering courage. Old Man Beckett, forgotten in the chaos, crouched behind a whiskey barrel. His breath came in rasping pants. Amarais caught his wide, fearful eyes and forced herself to nod steady, calm, just like her father taught her on that windswept ranch long ago. The wraith shifted his weight, eyes scanning the storm-lashed street. They're waiting on a signal, he said, more to himself than her. They'll want to hit us from every side, make it look easy. But the hollow's too small. They're packed tight. Their fear'll give them away. A crash from the rear. Alley window shattering. Amarais swung the shotgun's barrels toward the sound, pulse hammering. The wraith didn't flinch. He stepped closer to the bar, one hand resting lightly on the wood. Stay here. If they come through the back, you pull both triggers. Don't hesitate. I won't, she said. Her voice surprised her, steady, cold even. The last hour had burned something new into her veins, a raw resolve that trembled but did not break. The wraith's eyes flicked to her, unreadable in the lamplight. Good girl. Another crash, this time from the second-story balcony. Amarize's breath caught as she remembered the rooms up there. Empty now, but a good perch for a rifleman. The Wraith's jaw tightened. He drew a second revolver from his belt, checked the cylinder with a flick, then snapped it shut. "Watch the front. I'll clear the stairs." She wanted to tell him to. "Be careful," but the words died on her tongue. He moved like a ghost up the stairs, the floorboards creaking under his boots. Amarize counted each step until the storm swallowed the sound. Another heartbeat, then a voice, muffled by the thunder. "You see him?" "No," someone answered. "But I saw the girl. She's green. Might fold if we rush her." Amarize's breath misted in the cold air. She eased up, pressing her cheek to the stock of the coach gun, eyes narrowed on the doorway. Figures shifted just beyond the threshold, 3, maybe 4. She could make out the glint of a barrel, the twitch of a shoulder. "You go first." The first voice hissed. "Draw her fire." The Wraith's voice boomed overhead before they could finish. "Try it, and you'll lose more than your courage." A flash, then the sharp crack of his revolver. A body hit the porch with a dull, wet thud. The others bolted, boots pounding through puddles, curses trailing behind them. Amarize's lungs shuddered as she held her breath, waiting for another silhouette. None came. Above, the Wraith's boots thudded across the balcony. Another gunshot, then silence. When he appeared again on the staircase, his hat was gone, hair plastered to his forehead with rain and sweat. He moved like a man carved from the storm itself, eyes locked on hers. "Reload," he barked. "They're not done yet." She snapped open the coach gun, fumbling fresh shells into the breech. Her hands were slick with sweat, but she refused to let them shake. The Wraith vaulted the last 2 steps, landing lightly beside her. "They're testing us. Looking for weakness. You give them none." "I won't," she said again. It was true. Something about the storm, the smell of blood and gunpowder, something about him made her believe she could stand when others would run. A rumble of hoofbeats drowned out the rain. The Wraith turned toward the doors, shoulders tense. Shadows moved outside, 5 riders this time, their shapes dark lumps against the lightning-slashed street. They didn't rush the doors. They waited, like wolves circling a campfire. The lead rider swung down, spurs jangling. He stepped under the awning, face hidden under a slick oilskin hat. He tapped the batwing doors once, twice a gentle mockery. "Evening." "In there." His voice was bright, almost cheerful. "Heard the Wraith was dead. Seems the rumor's been ... exaggerated." The Wraith didn't answer. He just stepped forward, placing himself dead center of the doors. The man outside laughed. "Ah, but there's the rub, ain't it? You dying when we say you can. You laying down those iron beauties on your hips and coming out slow, like a good legend does. The girl, too. We don't want to hurt her none." Amarize's stomach twisted at the honeyed venom in his voice. She braced the shotgun tighter, peeking past the Wraith's shoulder. "Show your face," the Wraith growled. A pause. Then the man outside tipped his hat back, letting the lantern light catch on his grin. His teeth were yellow, his eyes bright and pitiless. "You remember me?" he asked, the grin widening. "Quincy Mallory. You put 2 slugs through my old man, back at Dry Creek. Left him to bleed while you rode on." The Wraith's shoulders shifted. Amarize saw the ghost of regret in his posture. "Your old man made his choices, same as you're making now." "Quincy." Mallory's laugh cracked like thunder. "Ain't it always choices with you? That's the trouble with legends. You think the world's a story you get to tell, but tonight we write the end." The Wraith's revolvers rose a fraction. Mallory's riders tensed in the storm behind him. "You come through that door," the Wraith said, voice low and dangerous, "and you'll see how stories really end." Amarize's pulse drummed in her ears. She could feel the break. Coming, the storm's weight pressing down. The truth that no matter what she'd been before, she'd never be that girl again. Quincy tipped his hat forward. "See you inside, Wraith." He stepped back. The riders fanned out. Hoofbeats and boots echoed through the storm. The saloon shuddered under the wind. The Wraith turned to Amorize. His eyes were tired, but there was steel behind the exhaustion. "When they come, don't hesitate. You pull that trigger, and you do it for you, not me." She nodded, breath shaky but eyes clear. "I will." He touched the brim of his missing hat in an old gesture of respect. Then he turned revolvers. Ready, as shadows gathered at the door, they didn't wait for the storm to die. They brought it with them. The doors of the Silver Spur shuddered under the impact of boots and shoulders as Quincy Mallory's men rammed their way in. Rain-lashed wind burst through the room, scattering spent casings and rattling the broken bottles behind the bar. Amorize. Calloway flinched but didn't shrink. She stood rooted behind the bar, the heavy coach gun leveled at the gap where the batwings hung crooked on their hinges. The midnight Wraith stood a few steps ahead of her, just inside the shifting wedge of lamplight. Water dripped from his coat, darkening the floorboards beneath his boots. His eyes never left the silhouettes crowding the threshold. For a heartbeat, time seemed to warp. Amorize could see each face, a line of rain-slicked hats and snarling mouths. Guns drawn, eyes hard, some too young, some too old. She wondered if any of them had a mother like hers, who'd once pressed a cross into her hand and whispered that fear is the weight you choose to carry or cast off. The Wraith didn't draw yet. He just stood there, his fingers twitching near, his holsters as if reading the moment by feel alone. Quincy Mallory strode forward, pushing through his men. His grin gleamed in the wavering lamplight. "You know what your problem's always been, Wraith," he said, voice silky over the storm. "You think you're the only one who can read a room." His boots scuffed broken glass as he stepped closer. The others spread out, blocking the exits. Amorize's pulse thudded so hard she felt it in her teeth. "I don't need to read a room," the Wraith murmured. "I just know how it ends." "Oh?" Quincy's laughter cracked like a whip. "It ends with you. And your little saloon girl dead. Ends with this town back in our pockets. Ends with no more bedtime stories about the big, bad Wraith." Amorize saw it then, the flex of the Wraith's shoulders, the faint shift of his stance. She sucked in a breath and braced her cheek to the coach gun's stock. Quincy tilted his head, mocking. "What's she gonna do, huh? You think she's ready for this?" The Wraith didn't answer. His eyes never left Mallory's. A flicker one of Mallory's men twitched, his gun dipping as he leaned to the side, trying to get a clear shot at Amorize. She saw the move, felt her hands stiffen, the barrels dip by instinct. For a heartbeat, doubt cracked through her resolve. Then her mother's voice, ghost soft. "Fear is a weight you choose to cast off." The man lunged for the bar. Amorize pulled both triggers. The shotgun thundered, rattling the walls. The man flew back into two others, all three crumpling in a spray of splinters and blood. Smoke coiled around her like a shroud. She didn't feel her own scream until the echo died. The Wraith moved. The instant the shot rang out, his revolvers barked 1, 2, 3, 4 each, shot like a blacksmith's hammer. The closest man's gun flew from his hand, another spun against a table. A third toppled into the hearth where embers hissed in the draft. Quincy ducked, cursing, shoving one of his men forward as a shield. The poor fool caught a bullet meant for his boss, eyes wide as he folded to the floor. Smoke stung Amorize's eyes. She fumbled to reload. Shells clinked against the bar top, her fingers clumsy, but her resolve unbroken. "Back!" The Wraith snarled at her, catching her sleeve as a bullet slammed into the counter inches from her ribs. "Stay down!" She ducked just as Quincy fired twice, the shot splintering a shelf of glasses above her head. Whiskey and glass rained down. Stinging her scalp, the Wraith pivoted, boots skidding through broken bottles. His coat whipped as he dove behind a table, bullets trailing him like angry hornets. The saloon floor turned into a battleground of shadows and shouts. Outside, thunder cracked and hoofbeats pounded. More were coming. Amorize could feel it in the bones of the floor. The outlaws hadn't brought their whole pack yet. This was just the opening strike. Quincy ducked behind an overturned bench, reloading, his grin a savage slash across his face. "You can't shoot your way out of this, Wraith. We own this town now." The Wraith's voice came from the shadows, calm as a prayer. "You can't own what you can't hold." Another outlaw vaulted the bar, knife glinting. Amorize swung the coach gun by its barrels, the butt crashing into the man's temple with a sickening crack. He crumpled, dead weight against the kegs. Her chest heaved. She could feel tears threatening, but they wouldn't fall. Not here. Not now. The Wraith's boots scraped across the floor as he rose, firing over the table. He caught another of Mallory's. Men in the knee. The man shrieked, folding like a broken puppet, then silence. Not the calm of peace, just a ragged breath between storms. Quincy Mallory stood slowly. His revolver pointed at the Wraith's chest, but the tremor in his wrist betrayed him. Amorize forced the shotgun barrels closed, the latch clicking with a sound that seemed to echo off the walls. Quincy's eyes flicked to her, wild. "Don't even think about it, girl." Amorize stared back. She could feel the thunder in her chest, the burn in her arms. She could feel the Wraith's presence beside her like an anchor, a shadow that promised she wasn't standing alone. The storm outside broke, rain lashing the windows. Lamplight flickered. The Wraith stepped from behind the table, gun steady. Boots silent as a cat. "Last chance, Quincy," he said. "Take what's left of your pack. Leave." Quincy barked a laugh that cracked under its own weight. "You think you scare me? You think a washed-up ghost and his pet girl can?" His pistol twitched up. Amorize squeezed the coach gun's triggers on instinct. The blast knocked her backward, ears ringing, shoulders numb. When the smoke cleared, Quincy Mallory sprawled against the saloon doors, eyes wide and vacant. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Rain pattered into the silence. The wind moaned through the holes left in the walls. Amorize lowered the smoking barrels, chest heaving. The Wraith holstered his revolvers, stepping closer. He laid a hand on her shoulder heavy, grounding. "Well done," he murmured. She let out a shaky laugh that tasted of salt and smoke. "More will come." The Wraith's eyes flicked to the street, where shapes shifted behind the veils of rain. "Let them." He moved to the doors, boots crunching over broken glass. Amorize followed, reloading with trembling fingers. Out there, beyond the pools of lamplight, Redemption Hollow waited. A town too small for legends, yet big enough to hold the weight of a girl who'd learned to stand her ground. More shadows gathered in the storm. They would not find the saloon girl shy ever again. Rain hammered the roof in waves that drowned out the ragged breathing inside the silver spur. The acrid bite of gunpowder still clung to the air, but Amorize hardly noticed. Her shoulder felt bruised where the shotgun had slammed back against. Her ears still rang from the blast that had ended Quincy Mallory, yet she didn't drop the gun. She didn't retreat behind the bar. She stayed standing, shoulder to shoulder with the midnight Wraith. Out on the muddy street, the storm revealed shifting shapes, riders circling back and forth beyond the lamplight, voices murmuring behind clenched teeth. Amorize could sense their hesitation through the glassless windows, feel the tension rolling off them like a thunderhead about to break. The Wraith stood motionless at the batwing doors, the wind tugging at the frayed edge of his coat. His revolvers were holstered, but Amorize had learned by now that it made no difference. His presence alone was a loaded gun. "You see them?" she asked, her voice tight from the smoke in her throat. He didn't look back. "They're waiting for someone braver to push forward. Someone meaner." She swallowed hard, peering past his shoulder. In the shifting curtain of rain, she caught glimpses of a rider who didn't pace like the others, someone who sat still. As stone on a black horse, the brim of his hat pulled low. The barrel of a rifle braced across his saddle. A flash of lightning revealed his face broad, scarred with a thick mustache that twitched around a cold smile. He tipped his chin, and a rider dismounted behind him, jogging up the boardwalk to the saloon. The wraith's eyes narrowed. He stepped forward just enough that Amaris felt a sudden emptiness at her side, like the warmth of a campfire replaced by a cold wind. The rider reached the doors, hat dripping water down his collar. He leaned in just far enough to show a toothy grin. "Got a message," he drawled, voice syrup thick and mocking. "Boss says you got 2 minutes to come out and kneel. Maybe he lets the girl live." Amaris's breath snagged. She braced the shotgun against her hip, her arms trembling but firm. The wraith's voice was low but carried through the crash of rain. "You tell your boss." He moved. Amaris barely registered the blur of his coat. There was a dull pop, a muffled thud. Then the rider stumbled back out the door, clutching his throat, the message unsent, eyes rolling white as he collapsed in the mud. Inside, the silence was alive. The wraith holstered his revolver as if he'd never drawn it at all. "Get more shells," he said to Amaris without turning. "They'll storm us proper now." She hurried to the bar's lower shelf, where Beckett had kept extra cartridges hidden behind old casks. Her hands found the wooden crate by feel, but when she turned, she froze. Beckett was standing there wobbly, pale as the moon, eyes wet with terror. His shaking hand clutched a small Derringer pistol, the barrel wavering between Amaris and the wraith's back. "Don't do this, Walt," Amaris said, voice tight, fighting the quiver in her belly. Beckett's eyes darted toward the door. "They said they'd leave me be if I opened the back. They know the passage behind the cellar. I can't die here, girl. I can't. You'll die quicker if you try that." The wraith's voice cut through the rain, still, facing the street. He hadn't turned, yet Amaris knew he saw everything. She stepped between Beckett and the wraith's exposed back, shotgun held across her chest. "Please," Beckett whispered. "Don't make me." He lunged. Amaris's finger didn't even squeeze the trigger. She swung the shotgun like a club, the heavy barrel cracking against Beckett's wrist. The Derringer clattered to the floorboards. He yelped, cradling his arm, crumbling to his knees. "I'm sorry," Amaris said, the words raw in her throat. "But no one's handing us over, not tonight." The wraith turned just enough to give her that ghost of a nod approval that weighed more than any sermon or father's praise. Thunder rolled, closer this time, and from outside came a hollered command, "Light it up." Fire bloomed at the edges of the windows. Molotov's old glass bottles, burning rags stuffed in the mouths. Flames licked the rain-chilled walls, painting the saloon in orange shadows. The smell of kerosene mixed with the smell of fear. The wraith's voice was calm, almost tender. "Cellar, now." Amaris wanted to protest. She could hold the line here. She could fight. But he was already grabbing Beckett by the collar, shoving him toward the trapdoor behind the bar. "Get him down there," the wraith said. "Keep him quiet. What about you?" She hissed. His smile was bitter and bright all at once. "Someone's got to bar the front. Don't you go." She grabbed Beckett by his good arm, half dragging him over the trapdoor as the first flames found old whiskey kegs, popping corks like gunfire. She glanced back once and saw the wraith framed in the doorway, silhouette sharp, gun drawn, rain washing soot from his hair, fire reflecting in his eyes like the last light of a dying star. Beckett whimpered as she shoved him down the ladder into the darkness. She followed, the trapdoor slamming shut above her. The roar of flames muffled, but never gone. In the cellar, barrels lined the walls. Dust and mold stung her nose. Beckett sobbed, rocking against a crate. "Stop that," Amaris snapped her, fear crackling into anger. "You're alive because he's up there. You think you'd be any safer with those men?" Beckett didn't answer, just pressed his sleeve to his nose. Above, boots thudded, the doors splintered. Shouts and gunfire mixed with the roar of burning spirits. Amarise crouched by the ladder, pressing her ear to the boards, every muscle quivering. With the urge to burst back through and stand at his side, then dash crack. A heavier boom than any revolver, the Wraith's shotgun. 2 barrels, deafening in the tight saloon. Screams cut off mid-breath. The floor trembled with bodies falling. Amarise's heart hammered. She couldn't see him, could only imagine him fighting through flame and smoke, a silhouette of iron and will. Her fists curled around the shotgun's warm barrels. Beckett muttered something, a prayer or a curse. Amarise ignored him, focusing instead on the voice that rose in her memory. Her mother's words. The Wraith's lessons, the quiet vow she'd made with her first trembling pull of that trigger. Above, the gunfire ebbed. Silence stretched like a thin thread, trembling on the verge of snapping. Then a muffled thud. A boot heel. Another. Steady steps. She pressed her palms flat to the boards. "Please," she whispered, not sure if she prayed for him to win, or for her to be strong enough if he didn't. A knock, firm but calm. Then his voice, clear through the crackling embers. "Amarise. Open up." She nearly laughed with relief. She shouldered. The trap door open. The smoke poured down like a vengeful ghost, but through it she saw him, blood on his shirt. Soot streaked across his cheek, the glint of fresh cartridges at his hip. "It's done?" she breathed. He shook his head. "No, but the worst of them are scattered. Word's out now. They'll send for more." She glanced at the blackened beams overhead, still glowing like the last coals of a dying fire. "Then what do we do?" He met her eyes steady, unflinching, as if he'd looked into every storm the world could throw his way and decided to stand. "Anyway, then we rebuild. We stand taller than the ashes they leave us." Amarise stepped up beside him, Beckett dragging himself from the cellar behind her, shame written in the slump of his shoulders. She looked past the broken doorway into the rain-slick street. Shadowy figures hovered at the far end, watching, waiting, but not brave enough to come forward yet. She felt the weight of the shotgun in her hands, the bruise blooming at her shoulder, the heat of the Wraith's presence beside her. And in that storm-battered doorway, she found herself standing straighter. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The charred beams of the Silver Spur Saloon dripped rainwater into the smoldering wreckage, hissing where the last embers clung to life. Amarise Calloway stood at the threshold, one boot planted on the warped floorboards, the other in the muck of Redemption Hollow Street. Smoke clung to her hair, and her bruised shoulder throbbed like a promise. She could feel the Wraith beside her, close enough that his breath stirred the wet strands at her temple. Across the street, shadows clustered behind wagon wheels and troughs, watching. Some were faces she recognized, townsfolk who had peeked out from shuttered windows when the shooting started, but had been too afraid to stand beside them. Others were riders, the last scrap of Mallory's pack, still hungry for blood, but suddenly shy of the doorway where legend stood, breathing like any other man. Amarise adjusted her grip on the shotgun. She could smell the sour twist of fear in the air. Hers, theirs, the Wraith's maybe too. No one was untouched. No one walked away the same after standing in that fire. Behind them, Beckett crouched in the wreckage, picking through broken glass and scorched wood. His lips moved soundlessly, but Amarise didn't care enough to listen. She had her eyes on the street, on the way the riders flinched when she met their gaze. "They'll come back," she said. Voice scraped raw but steady. The Wraith's nod was barely there, but she felt it as much as she saw it. "They'll wait until they think we're too tired to stand." A crash. Beckett tipped over a blackened keg and let out a string of curses. The old man's boots slipped in the ash as he hauled himself up. "I didn't mean for this." Beckett's voice broke the hush like a cracked bell. "I just wanted to survive. You think this makes me a traitor? You'd do the same if you had any sense." Amarise turned on him, every inch of her shaking with leftover adrenaline. You put a hole in the side of your own people's shelter. You opened the back door for men who would have strung up a child for spite. If you want forgiveness, find a preacher. I've got none left for you. The old man wilted under her stare. He shuffled deeper into the wreckage, mumbling about lost whiskey and back rent. Amarise didn't look at him again. The wraith holstered his revolvers with the same care he might have given a holy relic. He stepped past the threshold, boots sinking into the rain-churned mud. Amarise stayed a half step behind him, her world reduced to the splash of his footfalls and the crunch of shattered glass under her heel. See them? He asked without turning. She followed his gaze. The riders huddled by the old livery, near the busted water trough. A horse stamped nervously, its breath a ghost in the storm-chilled dawn. They're waiting for the next man to swear he's braver than the last, Amarise said. He chuckled a sound that was more exhale than laugh. Or bravery's cheap when you don't know the cost. One of the riders stepped forward. He was younger than the others, barely older than Amarise. His hat was too big for his head, the revolver strapped to his leg hanging like a borrowed threat. He swallowed hard and called out, "You can't hold this place forever." The wraith didn't raise his voice. "I don't need forever, just longer than you can stand." The boy's eyes darted to the shadows behind him. He half-turned, seeking support. But the other riders melted away into the drumming rain, boots splashing as they faded down the alleyways. In a heartbeat, he was alone with his trembling words. Amarise felt a pity she didn't want. She shifted the shotgun's barrels off his chest. "Go home. You still can." His mouth opened, closed. Then he bolted. His horse snorted as he flung himself into the saddle and vanished into the dripping hush. A door banged open down the street. A cluster of townsfolk emerged, shopkeepers, the sawbones with his crooked spectacles, even the preacher with his frayed collar turned up against the rain. They stared at Amarise and the wraith, like people waking from a nightmare and realizing the nightmare might not be done. "You gonna run next?" Someone called, a wiry man with a patchy beard, maybe a store clerk. Amarise couldn't tell. His eyes were wild with too many sleepless nights. The wraith stepped forward. His voice was sand and stone. "I've run before. Once. Never again." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Amarise felt it, the moment when fear curdled into something meaner, resentment. It wrapped around the edges of the hush like barbed wire. "They'll burn the rest of the hollow to get to you," the wiry man pressed. "Maybe we don't want that. Maybe it'd be easier if you just—" The wraith's head tilted. "Easier for who?" No one answered. Amarise wanted to say something, but the words tangled on her tongue. All she could think about was how fast a crowd could change, how quick folks were to beg a monster to fight their battles, and quicker still to blame him when the cost came due. The preacher stepped forward, boots slipping in the mud. He held up a hand, palm out like he was blessing them both. "We don't want more blood. We just want our lives back." "You don't get them back by pretending you're safe when you're not," Amarise snapped. She felt the wraith glance at her, a glint of something approving in his rain-damp eyes. "You want your town? Then you stand. You sweep the ashes and build new walls. Or you let the same men come riding through tomorrow, and you kneel." Silence swallowed the street. The preacher's hand fell to his side. One by one, the townsfolk looked away, each retreating into themselves, into the quiet rooms where dreams of peace died slow. The wraith turned to Amarise. His voice was rough, but there was steel beneath it. "We'll dig new trenches. Shore up what's left. They'll come again before the moon's turned." She met his gaze. "And when they do?" His eyes were tired, the lines at their corners carved deep by smoke and guilt and storms. "Then they learn that fire can't kill what won't burn." She shouldered the shotgun and faced the smoking ruin of the Silver Spur. There was no sign. left of the shy girl who had come west dreaming of coin and quiet corners. She stood beside a legend, but the weight on her shoulders was her own. And she found, to her surprise, that it fit her just fine. They turned as one, stepping over the charred threshold, boots grinding ash into the floor. The townsfolk drifted back to their doors, to their shadows. Outside, the rain kept falling soft as a blessing, cold as a grave. Redemption Hollow would sleep uneasily that night, but it would sleep free for now, and Amorize Calloway would stand her watch, shotgun loaded, heart braced for every footstep in the dark. Somewhere out there, more trouble was stirring. And this time, they would not find the hollow helpless dot this time. They'd find her waiting. The charred beams of the Silver Spur Saloon dripped rainwater into the smoldering wreckage, hissing where the last embers clung to life. Amorize Calloway stood at the threshold, one boot planted on the warped floorboards, the other in the muck of Redemption Hollow Street. Smoke clung to her hair, and her bruised shoulder throbbed like a promise. She could feel the wraith beside her, close enough that his breath stirred the wet strands at her temple. Across the street, shadows clustered behind wagon wheels and troughs, watching. Some were faces she recognized, townsfolk who had peeked out from shuttered windows when the shooting started, but had been too afraid to stand beside them. Others were riders, the last scrap of Mallory's pack, still hungry for blood, but suddenly shy of the doorway where legend stood. Breathing like any other man, Amorize adjusted her grip on the shotgun. She could smell the sour twist of fear in the air. Hers, there's the wraiths maybe too. No one was untouched. No one walked away the same after standing in that fire. Behind them, Beckett crouched in the wreckage, picking through broken glass and scorched wood. His lips moved soundlessly, but Amorize didn't care enough to listen. She had her eyes on the street, on the way the riders flinched when she met their gaze. "They'll come back," she said, voice tight from the smoke in her throat. "The wraiths." Nod was barely there, but she felt it as much as she saw it. "They'll wait until they think we're too tired to stand." A crash. Beckett tipped over a blackened keg and let out a string of curses. The old man's boots slipped in the ash as he hauled himself up. "I didn't mean for this." Beckett's voice broke the hush like a cracked bell. "I just wanted to survive. You think this makes me a traitor? You'd do the same if you had any sense." Amorize turned on him, every inch of her shaking with leftover adrenaline. "You put a hole in the side of your own people's shelter. You opened the back door for men who would have strung up a child for spite. If you want forgiveness, find a preacher. I've got none left for you." The old man wilted under her stare. He shuffled deeper into the wreckage, mumbling about lost whiskey and back rent. Amorize didn't look at him again. The wraith holstered his revolvers with the same care he might have given a holy relic. He stepped into the doorway, boots sinking into the rain-churned mud. Amorize stayed a half step behind him, her world reduced to the splash of his footfalls and the crunch of shattered glass under her heel. "See them?" he asked without turning. She followed his gaze. The riders huddled by the old livery near the busted water trough. A horse stamped nervously, its breath a ghost in the storm-chilled dawn. They're waiting for the next man to swear he's braver than the last, Amorize said. He chuckled, a sound that was more exhale than laugh. "Bravery's cheap when you don't know the cost." One of the riders stepped forward. He was younger than the others, barely older than Amorize. His hat was too big for his head, the revolver strapped to his leg hanging like a borrowed threat. He swallowed hard and called out, "You can't hold this place forever." The wraith didn't raise his voice. "I don't need forever, just longer than you can stand." The boy's eyes darted to the shadows behind him. He half turned, seeking support. But the other riders melted away into the drumming rain, boots splashing as they faded down the alleyways. In a heartbeat, he was alone with his trembling words. Amorize felt a pity she didn't want. She shifted the shotgun's barrels off his chest. "Go home, you still can." His mouth opened, closed. Then he bolted, His horse snorted as he flung himself into the saddle and vanished into the dripping hush. A door banged open down the street. A cluster of townsfolk emerged, shopkeepers, the sawbones with his crooked spectacles, even the preacher with his frayed collar turned up against the rain. They stared at Amarise and the wraith, like people waking from a nightmare and realizing the nightmare might not be done. "You gonna run next?" Someone called, a wiry man with a patchy beard, maybe a store clerk. Amarise couldn't tell. His eyes were wild with too many sleepless nights. The wraith stepped forward. His voice was sand and stone. "I've run before. Once. Never again." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Amarise wanted to say something, but the words tangled on her tongue. All she could think about was how fast a crowd could change, how quick folks were to beg a monster to fight their battles, and quicker still to blame him when the cost came due. The preacher stepped forward, boots slipping in the mud. He held up a hand, palm out like he was blessing them both. "We don't want more blood. We just want our lives back." "You don't get them back by pretending you're safe when you're not," Amarise snapped. She felt the wraith glance at her, a glint of something approving in his rain-damp eyes. "You want your town? Then you stand. You sweep the ashes and build new walls. Or you let the same men come riding through tomorrow, and you kneel." Silence swallowed the street. The preacher's hand fell to his side. One by one, the townsfolk looked away, each retreating into themselves, into the quiet rooms where dreams of peace died slow. The wraith turned to Amarise. His voice was rough, but there was steel beneath it. "We'll dig new trenches. Shore up what's left. They'll come again before the moon's turned." She met his gaze. "And when they do?" His eyes were tired, the lines at their corners carved deep by smoke and guilt and storms. "Then they learn that fire can't kill what won't burn." She shouldered the shotgun and faced the smoking ruin of the Silver Spur. There was no sign left of the shy girl who had come west dreaming of coin and quiet corners. She stood beside a legend, but the weight on her shoulders was her own. And she found, to her surprise, that it fit her just fine. They turned as one, stepping over the charred threshold, boots grinding ash into the floor. The townsfolk drifted back to their doors, to their shadows. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft as a blessing, cold as a grave. Redemption Hollow would sleep uneasily that night, but it would sleep free for now. And Amarise Calloway would stand her watch, shotgun loaded, heart braced for every footstep in the dark. Somewhere out there, more trouble was stirring. And this time, they would not find the hollow, helpless Dot. This time, they'd find her waiting. Bonehand Cragg's dark eyes narrowed to slits as he studied the flickering lantern light beyond the gully ridge. From his vantage behind a cluster of pines, he could make out the rebel silhouettes shifting at the edge of Redemption Hollow, smoke-stained. Buildings half rebuilt, bracing beams still exposed to the fall wind. His cruel grin revealed yellowed teeth remnants of a man who had traded mercy for infamy. He adjusted the duster at his shoulder, the metal fingerplate on his right hand catching the moonlight. The bone hand had earned his name by severing a rival's hand in a poker game, then casually dropping the stump into the man's own whiskey glass. That brutality had been a message and an invitation. Outlaws whispered in darker saloons about gathering beneath his banner, each seeking a fragment of bone and legend. Tonight, that legend would be tested against a saloon that refused to die. Cragg's first lieutenant, a wiry devil called Jesse Blackwell, crept up beside him. "The spies say they've trained almost every able-bodied soul. Even the preacher's boys' orphans, they say, know how to aim a Winchester now." Bonehand closed, one eye surveying the town's glimmering interior. "Good. Better that they fight like men than hide like rats. Few things disappoint as much as cowardice." Blackwell's grin was sickly. "The deserters, some politics types, spout about negotiating, offering tribute. Think the wraith might parley?" Cragg laughed softly. The Midnight Wraith is no diplomat. He'll bleed them dry before he takes coin. He let a moment pass, letting the wind carry his words over the hollow. Send 2 riders to circle north. Harass the supply wagons on the old mining road. Cut off their food, their water. Force them to sally out or starve. Blackwell bowed, disappearing into the pines. Cragg watched him go, feeling the familiar surge of anticipation power coiling in his gut. This was why he had drawn the map of terror across 6 territories, to watch walls crumble, to see the defiance of fools broken by superior force. But bone deep in his chest, a faint echo of doubt stirred. He'd seen legends wane. He'd heard whispers tales of a bartender turned gunslinger, a woman who stood at the bar with a shotgun and refused to flinch. He scowled, convinced those were bedtime stories for frightened children. Yet, as Cragg turned his mount back down the ridge, a ragged howl carried back, the iron gates closing at the hollow's perimeter. The brass hinges rang like a funeral bell. Inside, Amarais Calloway's voice rang clear over the thrumming of hammers. "Nail it tight, Cheb. Don't leave a crack for cold steel." She knelt by the patched doorway, pressing her palm to the timber, testing its strength. Beneath her bruised dark shoulder, the coach gun lay within reach, her silent sentinel. The wraith emerged from the shadows of the stairwell. Revolvers hung low, long coat brushing the newly swept floor. He paused beside her, eyes scanning the line of townsfolk, shopkeepers with rifles, former outcasts with muskets, children with pistols far too large for their hands. "Half moon's just set," he remarked. "Dark's on their side." She met his gaze, lips pressed thin. "Dark or not, they can't hide in it forever," he nodded once. "We've repelled the likes of Mallory. Bonehand's a bigger storm. He'll hit us from every side. North, east, south, no place to run." She swallowed hard, recalling the preacher's plea to avoid spilling more blood than necessary, and the faces of the children who had learned. "Gunshot as lullaby, then we give them no quarter." A distant clang steel on wood echoed when the last barricade post was hammered home. From outside came the scrape of wagons reined in, hoofbeats fast retreating to the corners of the hollow. Amarais walked to the main window, cradling the shotgun. Rain sluiced against the panes, casting the silhouettes of riders in liquid shadow. She counted at least 15, enough to push forward. Break the line. The wraith joined her, placing one gauntlet hand on her shoulder. "Here's what we do," he said, voice a low promise. "We draw them in. We make them think they can sweep through like kings. Then we welcome them with every hidden angle we've prepared." She felt the thrill of fear claw her ribs and the steely resolve. Beneath it, she drilled these townsfolk through every minute of day and night. Firing lines, crossfire lanes, reset points behind the bar, upstairs windows for the sharpshooter's dot. She turned to him. "Tonight, the hollow is mine to defend." His rare smile flickered in the lamplight. "My girl." They moved as one to the bar's center. The assembled fighters laid eyes on them, waiting. Amarais raised her voice. "Listen up, Bonehand's men are circling like ravenous coyotes. They'll test our walls, our will, our hope. Tonight, we show them we didn't carve this hollow out of the dust to watch it die. You hold this line each, and every one of you, and they'll see what true grit means." A murmur grew into a chant of determination. The wraith lifted a flask, tilting it to the crowd. Amarais took one, lifting it overhead. "To Redemption Hollow," he toasted. "To Redemption Hollow." She echoed. A single shot and every head snapped toward the door. Lights flickered beyond the windows as a shadow passed. It wasn't cavalry. It wasn't friend. It was a silent horseman, cask low, rider motionless as drifting smoke. Heartbeats froze. The door rattled under a whispered knock. Someone said in a hushed voice, "They're here." The lanterns inside the silver spur cast long, trembling shadows across the hushed crowd of defenders. Rain-gelled mud clung to their boots. rifles cradled in calloused hands and trembling fingers alike. Amory's Calloway stood by the reinforced doorway, shotgun resting on her hip, heart pounding against the stifling quiet. Every nerve in her body was taut, waiting. The midnight wraith moved among them like a whisper of dusk checking the preachers. Boys aim, nodding at the shopkeepers adjusting their barricade, murmuring instructions to the boarding house women holding loaded pistols. No one dared speak above a breath. The only sound was the rhythmic drip of water from the broken eaves onto the fresh-planked floor dot beyond the shutters. The storm raged on. Thunder rolled through the night, punctuating each heartbeat with primal insistence. In the distance, hoofbeats drummed out a slow, ominous cadence, growing louder with each passing moment. Amaraz's gaze snapped to the main window. Through a narrow slit in the shutter, she saw a ragged line of Bonehand Cragg's men, their silhouettes bobbing in the corduce. Torrential downpour, rifles raised, faces glinting with malice. At their head rode a lone figure, Cragg himself, master of terror, hand-plated in steel, cloak billowing like a corpse lifted by the wind. She swallowed, fists tightening. Across the room, the wraith met her eye, his expression unreadable in the stuttering lamplight. He inclined his head ever so slightly, a signal that spoke without words. Amarai stepped forward, voice low but steady. Hold fast. We give them nothing but lead and regret. A murmur of assent rippled through the defenders. The wraith moved to the spiral staircase, boots silent on the boards, as he gestured to the rifles braced on the upper balcony. Amarai's followed, the shotgun's weight both comfort and chain. They reached the balcony just as the first volley cracked outside. Rifle fire smashed against the outer barricade, wood splintered. Bullets pinged like hailstones. Amarai's gripped the railing, knuckles whitening. Cragg's men closed in. Their leader raised his voice, carrying through the storm. Surrender now, above the din of your own bones, and the wraith might let you keep your lives. Amarais felt her breath catch. She turned to the gathered faces on the balcony women. With tear-streaked cheeks, men whose jaws were set like stone. None wavered. Not tonight, she whispered. A single trigger pulled would send 2 shotguns worth of defiance into the night air. She raised her shotgun to the slat in the shutters, below. The wraith's voice cut in, on my mark. Her finger hovered. She closed her eyes, recalling the fire that had claimed their hearth, the blood that had stained their wood, and the choice they'd made to stand. She pictured each face no longer strangers, but fellow souls forged by hardship. She opened. Her eyes found Cragg's silhouette through the rain-washed glass and straightened. Now. The wraith's crisp command echoed. Gunfire roared. A double blast from Amarais's shotgun erupted through the shutter, cracked 2 pellets tearing into the first row of attackers. Below, rifles barked back from upstairs windows, gun ports drilled. Into the broken walls. The hollow rattle of bullets through wood filled the air. Cragg's men faltered, stumbling into the muck. Cragg himself raised a steel-gloved hand, signaling his forces to regroup. Then he strode forward alone, boots splashing through the muddy street, his cloak and metal hand gleaming in the lantern-tinged rain. His eyes locked on the balcony above. Amarai saw him, the legend walking in flesh, his broad frame shaped by malice and fire. She stood imposingly at the railing, shotgun cradled, but at ready, every ounce of her trembling resolve focused on that single figure. Cragg's voice, loud enough to slice through the storm. You girl wasn't 1 bullet. Enough to send you running? Amarais's jaw clenched. She raised her shotgun, but didn't fire. She held the stance of unyielding defiance. Below, the wraith emerged from the stairwell, revolvers drawn, steps measured. He cut through the chaos of rain and shadow, coming to stand beside Amarais at the balcony's lip. The sight of them sighed. By side, barkeep and gunslinger stole the breath of every soul on both sides of the barricade. Cragg tilted his head. the steel hand tapping rhythmically on his thigh. "I admire your spirit," he called, "but tonight it dies." He leveled his rifle, one shot separating them by the width of the night. Craig's finger moved to the trigger. Time slowed, rain held, breath suspended, and then an earth-shaking rumble from the eastern barricade crackled like a thunderclap. Reinforcements, a group of riders, battered but resolute, burst through the storm led by Alton from Cinder Gulch, rifles raised. Charging into the fray, Craig's rifle snapped too late. The shot flew wild, the stock ripping from his shoulder, and his iron hand thudded against the wood. He staggered back, momentarily unbalanced as the Wraith's revolver barked twice in rapid succession. Amarais didn't flinch. She pressed the shotgun's muzzle over the railing, watching as Craig regained his footing, eyes blazing with fury and respect. In that thunder-frozen instant, the world narrowed to three figures. Amarais at the barricade, rifle brandished. The Wraith standing unseen but present. And Bonehand Craig, wounded but unbowed, rising from the mud at the edge of Redemption Hollow. No one spoke, and in that pregnant silence, a single shell casings clinked against the railing, falling into the waiting darkness below, a harbinger of the desperate choices still to come. The night air inside the Silver Spur was thick with smoke and tension, every flicker of lamplight casting long dancing shadows across the walls. Amarais Calloway crouched behind the bar's makeshift barricade, shotgun cradled in her arms, eyes flicking to the spiral staircase and back to the front door where Bonehand Craig's lone shadow stood waiting. Rainwater dripped through cracks in the ceiling, splattering onto the planked floor with a steady, hollow rhythm. Below the balcony, the defenders pressed their backs against the carved wood panels. Old Reverend Thompson, hands trembling, reloaded his Derringer while two of his own flock once timid church mice knelt at the windowsills, rifles at the ready. Behind them, shopkeeper Marta Diaz adjusted the sights on her Winchester, jaw set in determined lines. On the street, a gust of wind tore at the battered sign of the Silver Spur, making it creak like a dying beast. Craig remained motionless under the propped awning, arms folded, his metal hand tapping softly against his side. Behind him, his men formed a semicircle in the muddy gutter, rifles trained upward. Amarais sucked in a breath, the cold edge of fear sharpening her focus. She glanced to the midnight Wraith, his coat still unbuttoned, coat hem brushing ash on the floor, who stood at her side, twin revolvers holstered but hands hovering, ready. His steely calm was a rock in the storm's center, anchoring her when panic threatened to break free. A distant crack, the rifle shot from Parton Ridge's deputy signaled the battle's next phase. Craig's men tumbled back as a bullet splintered. Wood near their feet. Craig's dark eyes narrowed. He raised a hand, and the riders surged forward. Dachshunds barked from the street, or maybe it was the shouts of outlaws as they climbed onto the porch, boots sloshing through water and mud. "Here they come," the Wraith whispered. Amarais's finger found the shotgun's trigger. She lifted it, vision narrowing through the slats of the boarded windows. Two silhouettes breached the threshold, rifles lowered in a feint. She pulled the trigger, double blast echoing like thunder, sending the first pair sprawling backward. Wraith moved with a predator's grace, stepping through the bar and letting the outlaws slide past before he spun, revolvers calling fire. Two more men fell, their rifles clattering. A rain-soaked board under his foot snapped. He stepped over it without missing a beat. From the staircase, Amarais heard the thud of heavy boots. Craig's lieutenant, Jesse Blackwell, blood trickling from a head wound, charged up the steps, pistol aimed at the Wraith's back. Amarais whirled, lifting her shotgun overhead. As Blackwell swung his gun, she brought the barrels down across his forearm. The snap was audible even over gunfire. Blackwell howled, dropping his pistol. Amarais's foot pressed against the killer's chest, pushing him toward the shattered bottles. The Wraith's revolver cocked, but she did not hesitate. She swept the shotgun across the back wall, cracking ribs and sending him crashing into the curve of the banister. Below, Craig's men hesitated, some firing blindly at the balcony, others calling curses into the rain. Craig himself stepped onto the porch, spurs ringing like church bells gone mad. He lifted his rifle, sight lining up on Amarize's silhouette against the embers of overturned lamps. Amarize felt the world narrow to the shudder of his breath in her direction. She lowered the shotgun, barrel aimed at his heart. "Drop it," she commanded, voice steady but fierce. Craig's grin stretched beneath his battered hat. "You won't fire, girl. You don't have the stomach." She pressed the trigger. A single booming report, a crimson bloom across Craig's chest. He staggered, fingers slipping from the rifle, metal-plated hand clanking to the porch boards. The storm seemed to pause. Amarize's ears rang. Smoke and rain mingled as Craig fell to his knees, searching her face for mercy. She kept the shotgun. "Trained. Surrender," she said. Now he lowered his gaze. Mud dripping, breath ragged, bone hand flexing in the shattered boards. The rain continued, each drop a witness to this reckoning. Craig reached slowly for the last bullet at his belt, but the Wraith's revolver was already at his temple. Silenced. And then a crack, a distant collapse as the eastern barricade gave way, Mallory's reinforcements pouring in, forcing the outlaws to scatter, the Wraith holstered. Amarize lowered the shotgun, stepping down from the balcony with deliberate care. She crossed the floor, each step echoing in the broken saloon. She knelt beside Craig, removing the hat from his head, letting the rain rinse away the night's fury from his face. "Bonehand," she whispered, voice soft. "Your reign ends here." He blinked once, then twice. Outside, the last of his men fled into the darkness, hoofbeats fading. Amarize stood, lifting Craig by the collar. She nodded to the Wraith's figure, a quiet pillar in the disarray. Together, they guided Craig to the back door, stepping over the debris of war to usher in an uneasy dawn. Dawn broke over Redemption Hollow in muted rose and gray, the first pale light filtering through cracks in the saloon's boarded windows. Inside, Amarize Calloway moved with tired precision, dressing new splints on broken beams, gathering fresh water in tins from Marta's livery, and checking each defender's wounds. The echo of last night's gunfire still clung to the wood like a stubborn stain. Bonehand. Craig lay bound on a makeshift cot behind the bar, silver hand shackled to the leg of a table, ragged breath rising with the rhythm of the storm's dying pulse. His black duster, now caked with mud and ash, lay discarded by the door, replaced by the dusty coat of a man stripped of terror and legend. Outside, the hollow-stirred townsfolk emerged from ramshackle homes, blinking against the half-light. They gathered just beyond the saloon walls, watching Amarize and the Wraith with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Words passed between them, questions about Craig's fate, murmurs of rebuilding, the unspoken fear of the next assault. Amarize paused by the cot, meeting Craig's dark eyes through the haze of pain. He reached up, silver fingers rattling against the shackles. "Breakfast," he rasped, voice raw from disuse. "Or shall I starve?" She offered him a cup of coffee and a piece of bread, small concessions from the town's dwindling stores. He took them with a grunt, half glaring as he chewed. "Not bad," he said, tone begrudging respect beneath the barb. She turned away to help Doc Green set a splint on one of Jesse Blackwell's injuries. The young outlaw lay moaning softly on the ground, the bar's rough planks cushioning his broken arm. The Wraith joined her, checking the tension on the splint. "He'll live," he said. She nodded, then paused. "What now?" He looked toward the windows, where fresh boards blocked the world outside. "We reinforce, send scouts along the ridge. Find where Craig's men regroup. We strike before they mass again." Amarize's gaze flicked to the muttering crowd beyond the saloon doors. Some lingered uncertainly at the threshold, others huddled near the gutted stables. She squared her shoulders. They'll help, they have to. The wraith gave a faint smile. Lead the way, Marshal Calloway. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and gunmetal. Amarise inhaled, steadying herself for what must come next. She crossed the threshold, shotgun in hand, every step echoing with the promise that Redemption Hollow would not fall as long as she drew breath, and held her ground. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Bonehand Crag's scattered forces trembled, knowing their legend would never again march unchallenged through these streets. The morning sun climbed slowly over the jagged ridge east of Redemption Hollow, turning the blackened boards of the Silver Spur Saloon into a scarred reminder of last night's brutal battle. Amarise Calloway stood at the threshold, the weight of her shotgun a familiar comfort against her battered shoulder. At her side, the midnight wraith, his face still streaked with soot and rain, surveyed the quiet street with cold, calculating eyes. The town had rallied in the wake of their victory over Bonehand Crag's assault. The defenders, shopkeepers, preachers, former outlaws, boys who once hid in church lofts had emerged from the saloon's refuge to bury their dead, mend the wounded, and reinforce the makeshift barricades. But the hollow was not yet safe. The scattered forces of Crag and Mallory still lurked beyond the ridge, whispering in the canyons like hungry coyotes, waiting for the chance to reclaim their legend. Crag's messengers will be back by dusk, Amarise said, voice low. She held out a scrap of parchment, one of the survivor's letters, hastily scrawled. An invitation to parley, a dare to meet atop the old stockyard. The wraith stared at the note, eyes unreadable. A trap, he said. She nodded. Or a test. He knows we hold him prisoner. He has nothing to lose by testing our resolve. They moved through the saloon's gutted interior, stepping over shattered glass and scattered shells. Each corner echoed with the memory of gunfire. On the bar's far end, Reverend Thompson blessed the wounded as Doc Green stitched a gash on Jeb's arm. How many? Amarise asked as they passed. Doc Green glanced up, sweat and soot on his brow. Half of Crag's riders have fled. The rest are wounded or holed up with Mallory. But take this parley without caution. You risk every soul in that saloon. Amarise pressed her lips together. The note had instructed her to bring only two. Herself and the wraith. No reinforcements, no show of force. Just the legend of the midnight wraith facing his nemesis one last time. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the newly installed shutters. Amarise and the wraith climbed astride Shadow, his black stallion grazing on the sparse grass at the saloon's edge. His dappled coat still bore the soot from last night's rain. Stay here, Wraith said to Jeb, who gripped the rails, eyes wide. You're in charge until we return. Amarise nodded, her throat tight. She swung onto the horse, adjusting her coat as Shadow snorted under her. They rode east, along the worn trail to the old stockyard, the sun burning brightness into the valley. Cattle pens stood empty, once bustling with rustlers and rustlers' bounty. Now the corral gates hung open, the boards scarred with bullet holes and clawing from desperate men down at the far end. Bonehand Crag stood flanked by two dawn-lit figures, Jesse Blackwool, gaunt and spiteful, and Alton's younger brother, Sam, his rifle lowered in uneasy respect. Behind them, the ridge's shadows hid Mallory's surviving few. Amarise slid from Shadow's back, Wraith dismounting beside her. The horses shuffled, restless on the gravel. Crag laid a heavy hand on his steel-tipped finger, tipping his hat. You honor my invitation, Miss Calloway. I thought you might cower behind barricades like the rest. Amarise squared her shoulders. I come to end this. But her gaze flicked to Wraith's face. No fear, just determination. Jesse Blackwool spat. An oath. You think you two can face us alone? We've got rifles, numbers. With a single motion, the midnight wraith stepped forward, revolvers drawn. His voice was steel. I don't need numbers. But if you waste time, you'll learn why Redemption Hollow won't kneel to your legend. Crag's grin widened. Then speak your piece, Wraith. Or does the saloon girl do the talking? Amarise stepped forward, voice ringing clear across the empty pens. We give you one chance. Lay down your guns. Walk away from this hollow forever. No more bloodshed, no more legends built on bones. A tense silence settled. The cattle pens creaked. In the morning breeze. Behind Crag, Jesse's finger twitched above his pistol. Sam's young face was pale. Crag's metal hand rose, knuckles white around the handle of his revolver. Last chance, Wraith. Or shall I remind your girl how easily legends fall? The Wraith's finger caressed the hammer. You remind me of nothing but dust and ghosts. Before Crag could answer, a rifle crack rang from the ridge behind him. Alton's. Men emerged, rifles raised on Jesse's flank, forcing him to jerk back. Then the preacher and Marta rolled out of hiding behind a corral fence, shotgun and Winchester leveled. Crag's eyes flicked to the flanking line survivors from both sides converging under Amarise's command. They had broken the parley trap without firing a shot. Amarise's voice carried across the hollow. Last call. Crag, leave now, or face all of us. The outlaws hesitated. The ridge collapsed with the echo of more hoofbeats reinforcements from Cinder Gulch, the lived-in cavalry of those who chose to stand. Bonehand Crag looked at his outnumbered men, saw their rifles trembling, their resolve shattered by unity. He spat on the gravel, metal hand flexing. Then, with a curt nod, he slammed the revolver butt into the dirt and kicked it toward the Wraith. Silence gathered like dust at their feet. Amarise waited as the sun climbed higher. The stockyard held its breath. Then Crag turned on Jesse and Sam, gesturing for them to gather the weapons. Without a word, they obeyed. Crag walked past Amarise, his boots kicking up grit. This changes nothing, he muttered, voice low. A legend dies easier on 2 legs than 50. Amarise raised her chin, then live with it. The outlaws slunk away, rifles slung low. The sun glinted on Crag's steel fingers as he watched them go. Then he shifted his gaze to the Wraith and Amarise. Fools, he said softly, but the words faded under the morning wind as he mounted his horse and rode east, where dust and destiny awaited. When the echoes of hoofbeats died, the stockyard lay empty but for Amarise and the midnight Wraith. Slowly, she let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. He stepped beside her, tipping his hat. Legends die, but heroes endure. Amarise turned, shotgun across her shoulders, heart steady. The hollow's defenders emerged to greet her, a town reborn at dawn's first light, stronger for the battles it had weathered. And at the center of it all, she stood tall, no longer a shy saloon girl, but the hero who had taught the West's deadliest gunslinger that true strength was born from unity, courage, and the unwavering will to protect what one loved most, home. The sun dipped low over Redemption Hollow, setting the burnt-out frame of the Silver Spur Saloon aflame with amber light. Amarise Calloway stood atop the battered balcony, watching the townsfolk below as they toiled, hammering fresh planks into columns. The broken walls, reinforcing the doors and windows with iron straps scavenged from old barns. Her shotgun rested across her lap, leather-lined barrels catching the sun's last glow. Beside her, the midnight Wraith, no longer hidden by shadow, leaned against the rail. His revolvers, gleaming at his hips, seemed to hum with anticipation. A week had passed since Bonehand Crag's retreat, yet the hollow had not found rest. The threat still loomed beyond the ridge, where Mallory's scattered outlaws had slipped away, licking their wounds and whispering of vengeance. Amarise closed, her eyes feeling the quiet hum of rebuilding enter her bones. This town had stood on its own for generations, shielded by silent canyons and the dusty hush of the West. Now, it was bound by a fiercer promise, to stand together against the storms that came for it. Below, the preacher's children raised a new banner, a simple canvas stitched with the silhouette of the saloon's sign and the words, "Hope survives," spelled in bold strokes. They called to Amorize and the Wraith, their voices carrying across the thrum of hammer and saw. Amorize made her way down the stairs, every step deliberate, each plank promising new strength. She reached the group, ruffling the hair of the preachers. Youngest boy, as he held the banner nailed across the front window. "Heavy piece of work," she said, voice warm. His grin revealed missing teeth and boundless pride. "Made us feel like we're not just a bunch of scared folk, Miss Amorize." She knelt beside him, pressing the banner flat. "That's because you're not. This town's built on steel hearts and steady hands." A murmur of agreement rose as the defenders paused in their labor. At the saloon's edge, the stables were already bustling with preparation, supply wagons being loaded, horses being tended, rifles being checked and rechecked. New drills whispered among the men who had once trembled at the sound of OOFBEATS stopped from the distance. A scouting party led by Alton returned, dust-laden and grim-faced. He rode up, reined in, and dismounted with silent urgency. "They're gathering," he said, his voice low. "Mallory's men, maybe 20 now, are camped along the eastern pass. They've got cover rocks ravines. They'll strike at dawn." A hush fell. The resemblance of impending siege settled like a shroud. Even as the town strove to stand taller, the Wraith stepped forward, boots sinking into the churned mud. "Then we meet them there." Amorize's gaze flicked to the cracked street homes still boarded, barns half dismantled, the scars of fire still fresh. She felt a kinship with these wounds, for they mirrored her own, bruises of survival, edges of new strength. "We'll ride at first light," she declared. "Take the high ground, use the canyons, keep them off our door." Doc Green, leaning on his cane from the saloon's collapsed porch, nodded emphatically. "Best idea I've heard in days." The preacher crossed himself, lips moving in silent prayer. Even as he prayed for peace, his eyes burned with resolve. Night fell over Redemption Hollow like a quiet blessing, the wind carrying embers of memory and purpose. Amorize stood at the saloon's threshold, shotgun across her back, eyes on the ridge beyond the gorge. She remembered the woman she had been, timid, dreaming of quiet corners. Somewhere beneath the grit and scars was still that dreamer. But now, as the darkness gathered and cowled the world in ink, she embraced what she had become. A sentinel at the door of her home, a guardian of hope, and a marker in a land where legends were born of fire and tempered by unwavering will. When dawn broke, she would ride to meet the wolves at the canyon's mouth. And she would show them that Redemption Hollow was not a saloon to be plundered, but a beacon that would outshine any darkness. Because sometimes, the fiercest gun in the West is a woman's unwavering resolve. With dawn comes the next chapter of their stand. Let's keep the fires burning and ready ourselves for the ride into the canyon. Amorize Calloway sat astride shadow as the first pale fingers of dawn crept over the canyon rim, painting the rocky walls in bruised purples and dusty rose. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and cold steel, and somewhere beyond the next ridge, Mallory's ragged band of outlaws began to stir. She tightened her grip on the reins, leather biting into her palms, and glanced at the midnight Wraith riding beside her. His revolvers were strapped low at his hips, his eyes narrowing into the gathering light. Neither spoke, for words would only stir the tension that crackled between the twin rows of horses and rifle-wielding townsfolk lined up behind them. Below, Redemption Hollow lay quiet, its boarded windows reflecting the soft dawn. Behind the town's defenders stood the rebuilt Silver Spur Saloon, its new planks still smelling of fresh-cut wood and sweat. This morning, the saloon's walls would hold more than whiskey and whispered confessions. They would bear witness to the next stand of courage in a land that forgot fear all too easily. Amorize raised her voice, low and clear. "Remember what we fight for, home, family. Every dusty dream we dared to dream when bullets flew through those windows. You hold this line with me, and we send Mallory's men back where they belong." A murmur of affirmation rolled across the makeshift battalion. The preacher's daughter tightened her grip on a lever-action rifle. The blacksmith hefted his shotgun. With renewed resolve, boys who had once trembled at every distant hoofbeat now squared their shoulders, ready for the thunder of war. The wraith inclined his head. On my mark. His voice was the hush before a storm, the promise of inevitability. Amarise tapped the flat of her palm against Shadow's neck. When you see the dust rise, that's our cue. Hold steady, pick your shots. We strike from the high ground, no mercy, no retreat. And with that, they rode forward into the yawning canyon mouth, rifles ready, hearts set on the impossible, turning back the wolves that dared to haunt redemption. Hollow's Door, Part 14 continues. Closing parenthesis. The dawn light fractured through the canyon's jagged windows, scattering gold across the dusty earth like shattered hopes. Amarise Calloway guided Shadow along the narrow trail, heart pounding in time with the horse's hoofbeats. Every ridge and rocky outcrop was etched with memory, each shadow a potential ambush, each wind-whispered echo a trap set by Mallory's desperados. Behind her, the midnight wraith rode like a specter at her shoulder, eyes cold as flint, revolvers unholstered. And at the ready, their small column of townsfolk, shopkeepers turned riflemen, the preacher's children clutching pistols too big for their small hands, and the old blacksmith who still limped from a shattered leg pressed close. They wore determination like armor, ragged but unbroken. Amarise inhaled the canyon's scent, dry sage, baked stone, and the faint tang of blood from last week's siege. The earth beneath her boots felt alive, humming with the memory of every hoofprint, every bullet hole, every sacrifice that had brought them to this moment. She signaled a halt. The wind died on the ridge above them, carrying only the hush before. A storm. Looking up, Amarise saw Mallory's sign, a dark silhouette brandished on a makeshift banner, hanging from a jagged stalagmite like a blade pointing toward their hearts. The wraith pressed a hand to her arm. Prepare yourselves. They've drawn a line. We ride through it. Her throat tightened. She stood and dismounted, shotgun in hand, boots crunching on gravel. The defenders followed suit, weapons lunging into view in a gesture that said, "We stand or fall together." From above, a single rifle barked. The shot rang out like a death knell, one of the preacher's sons, testing the wind, gauging range. He fell silent, waiting for instruction. Amarise lifted her shotgun, leveling it at the hidden cliff face. "Steady," she called, throat raw but firm. "We strike on my command, aim for their shoulders, no shots wasted." Below, Mallory's men emerged from their hideouts, rifles trained on the narrow pass. They wore masks of desperation and greed, eyes widening at the sight of the 100-strong militia assembled behind Amaris's command. Mallory himself rode forward, Colt revolver glinting beneath his hat. "You've got guts coming here," he called, voice carrying over the wind. "But guts won't save you now." Amarise held his gaze. "Watch us try." She raised her shotgun, the barrels gleaming gold in the morning sun, and the first cue thundered across the canyon, a horn's blast from the wraith's hornpipe, a wild sound that twisted on the wind and carried the promise of reckoning. Then, hell broke loose. The defenders surged forward, rifles cracking, shotguns roaring in unison. Amarise ducked a bullet, returning fire with brutal precision, pump action singing through the air, sending Mallory's riders scattering beneath her charge. The preacher's daughter slung around from her Winchester, taking down black wolves. Lieutenant, as he tried to flank them, the wraith moved like a wraith unleashed, twin revolvers dancing in arcs of fire. Each shot felled a man, each fallen outlaw a testament to the taste of survival in those who refused to kneel. Amid the roar of battle, Amarise spied Mallory lunging for cover behind a boulder. She reloaded on the fly, boots skidding against the slope. The canyon walls echoed with gunfire, spurring her forward. Mallory saw her coming, his grin savage, fear flickering behind his eyes. "You can't kill me, girl." I've got too many ghosts riding with me." She didn't hesitate. The coach gun's thud echoed off stone, the blast rocking her chest. Mallory staggered, thrown off the boulder, landing hard on the jagged earth. His revolver fell from numb fingers. Silence fell like a drape. The canyon held its breath. Amarai stood over him, shotgun leveled, every lost moment of fear and doubt washed away by the flood of triumph. Mallory spat blood, eyes wild. "Give it up," she said, voice steady as bedrock. "There's nothing left for you here." He reached for his pistol, trembling. The Wraith's revolver turned toward him, silent and certain. "I wouldn't, Mallory." Mallory froze, then dropped the pistol. The barrel hit the ground with a metallic click, echoing down the pass. Behind him, his riders slumped, defeated, lowering rifles in surrender. Amarais holstered her shotgun, turning to the defenders charging through the canyon, faces alight with relief, tears mingling with sweat and dust. The preacher knelt beside his son, weaving a quick blessing. While the blacksmith helped Blackwell from a shallow cut, the Wraith approached, placing a hand on Amarais's shoulder, warm, grounding. She met his gaze, and in that moment, no legend stood between them, only two souls bound by fire and faith. Above, the sun claimed the canyon with full might, burning away shadows and cleansing the earth. Amarais lifted her shotgun in a salute, not to death or destruction, but to the stubborn, bruised promise of life that refused to be snuffed out. In that silent canyon, Redemption Hollow found its voice. No more ghosts, only the living. Amarais sheathed her weapon and turned toward home, each step lighter than the last, each heartbeat a triumphant drum. The saloon's doors would open to cheers and to the next chapter in a story born of gunfire, grit, and an unwavering will to stand. West had seen its deadliest gunslinger, its shy saloon girl, become a legend not of bullets, but of hope. And her story was only just beginning. The sun slipped behind the western ridge, spilling molten gold across Redemption Hollow's battered streets. Amarais Calloway stood at the helm of the repaired saloon balcony, her silhouette sharp against the dying light. In her hands, the shotgun felt both familiar and foreign, its weight a reminder of every decision that led her here. Behind her, the town's defenders moved like shadows at dusk, rifles slung over shoulders, eyes scanning the horizon. The Wraith, his once dark coat now streaked with dust and sunlight, joined her at the balcony rail. His presence was a quiet thunder, a promise that they were not alone. Together, they watched as the first stars blinked awake above the canyon's rim. "This won't be easy," Amarais said, voice low but clear enough to carry across the wooden boards. She had sent the reconnaissance party out at first light. They'd returned with word that Mallory's remnant had rallied under a new banner, a black flag marked with bone-white symbols, fluttering in the breeze like a challenge. The Wraith nodded toward the east. "They march again come dawn. They've learned to fear the hollow, but fear cuts both ways." Below, Barton's forge kettle hissed as steam steamed off smoothed bullets. He hefted each round in his calloused hand, weighing it as a father might weigh his newborn son. For 6 nights, the blacksmith had worked through the small hours, forging ammunition for every rifle in town. Tonight he joined the watch atop the roof where the shingles had been replaced and trenches dug beneath. Amarais turned her gaze to the street. The saloon's doors, once swung wide to welcome weary travelers, now stood bolted fast. But beyond them, new life stirred, lanterns lit in livery windows, smoke curling from bakeries. The preacher lighting a lantern in the church, its stained glass windows aglow with soft color. Redemption Hollow was a town made of light carved from darkness. She closed her eyes, remembering her first morning here, trembling behind the bar, a stranger among strangers. Back then, the loudest sound had been the clink of glasses. Now every nerve tuned for the cadence of war drums. "Are you ready?" the Wraith asked. Amarais opened her eyes. She lifted her chin, the evening breeze teasing the hem of her coat. ready as I'll ever be. Below, the preacher's children lined the western barricade, their rifles resting across railings. The oldest, Sarah, turned to dart Amarise a quick nod. Younger ones named Tom and Ruth held doll-eyed gazes that refused to waver. Amarise stepped down from the balcony and across the shattered threshold. Each footstep stirred memories of splintered wood and spilt whiskey, but she did not falter. The shotgun's barrels caught the lantern light as she passed. At the far end of the bar, Doc Green packed his medical satchel. Face grim, hands steady, beside him, Marshal Mallister, brother to the Wraith's old friend Bob, stood at the doorway, badge polished anew. "You're going out there with her?" the Marshal asked, voice low enough that Amarise caught the question before she responded. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The Wraith answered. Mal Lister met Amarise's eyes. No words passed, just a shared understanding that this stand would demand every ounce of courage they could muster. Outside, the wind changed, carrying the scent of sage and sulfur. They mounted Amarise on Shadow, the Wraith on his black stallion, and rode toward the town's gates. Behind them, Redemption Hollow held its breath, every lantern lit, every rifle loaded, every soul ready to face the night. They reached the gates, the iron bars newly reinforced. Beyond lay the canyon pass, dark and dreadful. Amarise slowed her. "Mount. Give us a minute," she said, voice respectful of the night's hush. She slid from Shadow's back, shotgun in hand, and stepped forward to the gates. The townsfolk lined up behind her, rifles pointed east, faces solemn. Amarise raised the shotgun overhead, barrel tip glinting. She inhaled the desert air, free and fierce. "Tonight," she called, voice echoing off the canyon walls, "we stand. At the last door, we fight not for glory, but for home. For every whisper of hope that brought us to this day, let them come." Silence followed. Stars shimmered in the velvet sky. And somewhere in the east, Mallory's riders drew their final breaths before the charge. Another hour passed, an hour of silent vigil, each defender a monument to defiance. At last, the wind's whisper turned to the distant rumble of hoofbeats. Saddles creaked, rifles were readied, lanterns swung at the gates. Amarise climbed back onto Shadow. The Wraith mounted at her side. "Hold fast," she said, voice steady. "Hold fast," he echoed. The gates creaked open, hinges groaning against the weight of inevitability. Through the gap rode Mallory's last stand, tired eyes beneath battered hats, rifles leveled, desperation their companion. Amarise spurred Shadow forward. The townsfolk behind her cheered not a war cry, but a chorus of every soul who chose to stand and fight rather than kneel and die. The gap closed. They met at the canyon's mouth, not legend verses, legend, but will against will, heart against heart. And in the hush before the thunder of war, Redemption Hollow's defenders stood, together, ready to protect the door that no darkness could shut. Night draped itself over Redemption Hollow like a velvet cloak, the lantern-lit streets shining in golden pools against the ink-blue sky. Amarise Calloway and the Midnight Wraith stood at the Saloon's barricade, rifles cradled in their arms, watching the horizon through the carved loopholes in the wooden planks. Every breath brought the scent of pine and smoke alive with the promise of confrontation. Below, the town's defenders took their positions, the preacher's boys manning the rooftop watch, the blacksmith loading fresh cartridges, the baker's wife adjusting a farm rifle, her knuckles white around the stock. In the hushed anticipation, Amarise felt the weight of each life assembled behind her, a tapestry of hope and defiance against the rising threat. From the east, hoofbeats pounded in the distance, cautious at first, then swelling into a thunderous charge that rattled shutters and set nerves on edge. Cresting the ridge came the remnant of Mallory's riders, ragged silhouettes emblazoned by their tattered banner, eyes gleaming with hungry desperation. "Hold," Amarise commanded, voice steady as a metronome. She raised her rifle, the barrel catching the lamplight. Wait for my mark. The riders thundered closer, a wave of dark shapes under the moon. The first battered horse splintered a plank at the barricade. The second charged into the gap. Dust and splinters exploded, and Amarize's finger tightened on the trigger. At her cue, rifles barked in unison. Shots rang out like 1,000 clattering hammers, shattering the night silence. Horses reared and men fell, their screams cut short by the unforgiving rain of lead. Amariz's shot caught the lead rider's gun arm, wrenching the weapon loose. He reeled, eyes wide as the wraith's revolver barked twice more, each bullet carving a path through the darkness. The surviving riders veered into the canyon's shadow, disarray rippling through their ranks. Amarize kept her aim true, each shot felling another outlaw until only Mallory's lieutenant, Jesse Blackwell, broke cover to retreat up the ridge. The roar of hoofbeats faded, and the defenders exhaled in unison, a single sigh of relief mingled with the acrid taste of gunpowder. Amarize lowered her rifle, heart pounding in her ears. Beneath the star-flecked sky, she met the wraith's gaze. In his eyes shone the reflection of lamplight and the quiet fire of pride. "Tonight, we wrote a new line in the canyon," he said softly. She nodded, breath shaky but triumphant. "And we'll hold it until dawn's light chases every last shadow away." Behind them, razor wire sprang across the main street, new trenches dug at every corner. The hollow had survived another night. But the battle was far from over. Mallory's scattered remnants would regroup, and Bonehand Cragg's ghostly promise of return still lingered in their ears. Still, in that lantern-lit moment, Amarize Calloway stood as the sentinel of a town reborn, steadfast, fearless, and ready to guard the door against every storm that dared to return. The morning light broke through a thin veil of dust hovering over Redemption Hollow, tinting the horizon with muted ochre and amber. Amarize Calloway stood atop the saloon's roof, steel-reinforced boards spread beneath her boots, eyes narrowed against the stirring wind. The town lay stretched out below, a patchwork of fresh repairs, burned-out shells, and stubborn hope held together by the weary hands of its defenders. She inhaled the dry air, tasting the grit on her tongue. Last night's battle at the gates had ended in a hard-won stand. Dawn had come with the echo of hoofbeats fading into the distance, but rest was a luxury they could not afford. Beyond the eastern ridge, Mallory's remnants had slipped away into the jagged canyons like shadows dissolving into the rocks. Now the wind carried a new omen, a swirling dust storm churning from the north, obscuring the crest of the ridge and the path through the ravine. At her side, the midnight wraith climbed to join her on the roof's edge. His coat fluttered in the rising breeze, eyes fixed on the brewing storm. "Storm's coming," he said, voice low and gravelly. She nodded, hand drifting to the worn leather strap of her shotgun. "And with it, they'll come. They'll use the dust to push us back, pick us off before we can aim." He glanced at her, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. "So we'll fight blind, or we'll turn the storm against them." Amarize's pulse quickened. She scanned the horizon. The dusty maelstrom roiled like a living thing, swallowing peaks and spitting pebbles across the plain. The defenders moved like ants below setting barrels to weigh down tarps, loading sand into sacks for new barricades. Posting lookouts braced against the wind. She slid down from the roof and sprinted across the yard to the barn, her boots pounding the packed earth. Inside, Barton the blacksmith stoked a furnace, sending sparks up the chimney like fireflies. He glanced at her, face lined with soot and concern. "It's coming fast," Amarize said, catching her breath. "I need every broken barrel, every loose plank. We're building sight tubes, narrow slits through which we can flush them out when the dust hits. We blind them first, then we shoot." Barton nodded, already grabbing scrap wood. "Get Martinez on the lathing. I'll forge fast frames to fit the shutters." Amarize hurried to the smith's anvil, where the wraith joined her, his revolvers held out. I need those side hampers at the saloon window quick draw ports that can't clog with dust. You think you can fashion them in time? He lifted a steel panel, running calloused fingers over its cut groove. 3 of them. You'll have tubes high, tubes low. Make them shoot straight and leave no angle unseen. Together, they worked as the storm advanced, hammering, cutting, drilling narrow ports in shuttered planks, mounting iron frames at thigh and eye level. Dust filtered through cracks, turning the barn's windows into gray screens. Emma's eyes wiped a grimy strand of hair from her eyes and tested the first shutter hole, barely wider than her forearm, but clear enough to align a shotgun barrel. She straightened, adrenaline sharpening her focus. When that dust hits, we hold those ports. They'll close in thinking we're deaf, blind. We open fire at point blank. They won't know what hit him. The Wraith slid a cartridge into a frame and sealed it with a flap of leather. And if they breach the main gates, we fall back to the cellars. The halls below are narrow, perfect for choke points. A distant rumble signaled the storm's wall crashing again. The morning light broke through a thin veil of dust hovering over Redemption Hollow, tinting the horizon with muted ochre and amber. Emery's Calloway stood atop the saloon's roof, steel-reinforced boards spread beneath her boots, eyes narrowed against the stirring wind. The town lay stretched out below a patchwork of fresh repairs, burned-out shells, and stubborn hope held together by the weary hands of its defenders. She inhaled the dry air, tasting the grit on her tongue. Last night's battle at the gates had ended in a hard-won stand. Dawn had come with the echo of hoofbeats fading into the distance, but rest was a luxury they could not afford. Beyond the eastern ridge, Mallory's remnants had slipped away, into the jagged canyons like shadows dissolving into the rocks. Now the wind carried a new omen, a swirling dust storm churning from the north, obscuring the crest of the ridge and the path through the ravine. At her side, the midnight wraith climbed to join her on the roof's edge. His coat fluttered in the rising breeze, eyes fixed on the brewing storm. "Storm's coming," he said, voice low and gravelly. She nodded, hand drifting to the worn leather strap of her shotgun. "And with it, they'll come. They'll use the dust to push us back, pick us off before we can aim." He glanced at her, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. "So we'll fight blind, or we'll turn the storm against them." Amarise's pulse quickened. She scanned the horizon. The dusty maelstrom roiled like a living thing, swallowing peaks and spitting pebbles across the plain. The defenders moved like ants below setting barrels to weigh down tarps, loading sand into sacks for new barricades, posting lookouts braced against the wind. She slid down from the roof and sprinted across the yard to the barn, her boots pounding the packed earth. Inside, Barton the blacksmith stoked a furnace, sending sparks up the chimney like fireflies. He glanced at her, face lined with soot and concern. "It's coming fast," Amarise said, catching her breath. "I need every broken barrel, every loose plank. We're building sight tubes, narrow slits through which we can flush them out when the dust hits. We blind them first, then we shoot." Barton nodded, already grabbing scrap wood. "Get Martinez on the lathing. I'll forge fast frames to fit the shutters." Amarise hurried to the smith's anvil, where the Wraith joined her, his revolvers held out. "I need those side hampers at the saloon window quick draw ports that can't clog with dust. You think you can fashion them in time?" He lifted a steel panel, running calloused fingers over its cut groove. 3 of them. "You'll have tubes high, tubes low. Make them shoot straight and leave no angle unseen." Together, they worked as the storm advanced, hammering, cutting, drilling narrow ports in shuttered planks, mounting iron frames at thigh and eye level. Dust filtered through cracks, turning the barn's windows into gray screens. Amarise wiped a grimy strand of hair from her eyes and tested the first shutter hole, barely wider than her forearm, but clear enough to align a shotgun barrel. She straightened, adrenaline sharpening her focus. When that dust hits, we hold those ports. They'll close in thinking we're deaf, blind. We open fire at point blank. They won't know what hit him. The Wraith slid a cartridge into a frame and sealed it with a flap of leather. And if they breach the main gates, we fall back to the cellars. The halls below are narrow, perfect for choke points. A distant rumble, a brittle dawn edged its way into Redemption Hollow, painting the sky in pale apricot hues that did little to soften the hard lines of war. Amory's Calloway walked the perimeter of the town's barricade, boots crunching on scattered cinders and fresh boards. Each plank and log represented hours of labor, sweat, and a fierce refusal to bow. Yet, as she gazed toward the north ridge, where Mallory's riders had disappeared into the canyons, she felt the sharp tug of unease, the knowledge that this reprieve, like all others, was only temporary. Behind her, the Midnight Wraith stood sentinel at the saloon's reconstructed doors. His revolvers glinted in the morning light, a silent vow that he would never allow those doors to swing open to violence again. They exchanged no words. Their partnership was forged in unspoken understanding, in the shared weight of loss and the twin fires of determination. Amory's moved along the wall where the preacher's children had drilled new loopholes for rifles. She bent to inspect each slit, testing the angles with an eager eye. Dust from the night's storm still clung to the wood, but otherwise, the work was sound, a testament to the town's collective resilience. She paused at the largest opening, where she could see 5 long barns that marked the edge of the western fields. It was there, she knew, that Mallory's men would try to regroup for another strike. She traced the horizon. Nothing but open land now, empty of both horses and outlaws. There was a silence that felt fragile, as if the earth itself held its breath. Amory's, the Wraith's voice cut through the hush. She turned to find him approaching, a folded sheet of paper in his hand, a map hastily drawn by a scout last night. The edges were burnt in places, the ink smudged by damp hands. He unfolded it, the canyon's winding trails, the hidden alcoves in the cliffs, the ridge lines where dust devils still danced. Mallory's remnants had moved further north, skirting the canyon's lip, seeking a vantage point for a final assault. They'll strike at high noon, he said quietly. Their last chance before word spreads to neighboring towns. Her heart tightened. High noon, the hour when the sun hangs highest, when every shadow vanishes and every flaw is exposed. Perfect for an ambush. Amory's refolded the map, tucking it into her coat. Then we meet them on the ridge. He gave a slow nod. I'll take half the men to flank. You and the rest hold the center. She met his gaze, steel and resolve burning in his eyes. We'll end this. Below, the townsfolk gathered in the main street, rifles slung and saddlebags packed. They were a ragged army, but their eyes shone with fierce pride. Amory's stepped before them, raising a hand for silence. Today we cross the ridge. She began, voice carrying like a clarion call. Mallory's men think they can scare us back into our homes, back into shadows. But we've already proven they cannot break our spirit. Today we break their hold on these lands once and for all. We ride not as outlaws hunted, but as defenders determined. Together. A roar of assent rose, echoing off the boarded windows and battered walls. Even the battered saloon sign above them seemed to sway in approval. Amory's mounted Shadow, climbing into the saddle with the ease of a rider born in these parts. The Wraith followed, his own horse stamping in patience. The townsfolk fell in behind, a motley but unwavering line. They moved through the gate, the barricade's timbers groaning in gratitude. Outside, the desert air blazed with the promise of confrontation, each shaft of sunlight a reminder that time ran out. The climb was steep, the trail narrow and littered with loose stone. Amora's chest heaved with the effort, the shotgun strapped across her back bumping against her shoulder with each step. Below them, Redemption Hollow shrank to a patchwork of roofs and smoke, its walls alive with the memory of battles past. At the ridge's crest, Amarys paused to look back. The wraith halted beside her. Together they took in the sight, their home, their fight, their legacy, all held in the steady glow of the morning sun. Without a word, Amarys turned forward. Beyond lay Mallory's flag, just visible through the heat haze, marking the final staging ground. She felt the solidity of shadow beneath her, the soft breath of her horse mingling with her own. She raised her arm, the shotgun's barrels pointed to the banner below. "For Redemption Hollow," she whispered. The wraith raised his hat in quiet salute. "For Redemption Hollow." And with that, they rode into destiny, two figures riding into the heart of the canyon, where the final reckoning would decide not only the fate of a saloon girl and a legend, but the very soul of a town that refused to be forgotten. The sky above Redemption Hollow broke open in a final burst of dawn's light, painting the canyon walls in fiery gold and setting the horizon aflame. Amarys Calloway and the Midnight Wraith stood at the summit of the northern ridge, from where they could see every twist of the canyon pass below. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of sage and the distant sting of spent gunpowder. Behind them, the assembled townsfolk, now more than 100 strong, waited in hushed anticipation, their rifles trained on the path where Mallory's final stand would unfold. The preacher's children, Sarah and Tom, knelt side by side, fingers steady on the stocks of their Winchesters. The blacksmith Barton loomed over them, a gentler fierceness in his eyes as he gave a quick nod. Maribel Cross, the boarding house matron, clutched her lever action with a grim resolve. Even old Beckett, once too frightened to step inside the saloon, leaned forward, wrenching the butt of his derringer in trembling hands. Between them, a silent bond. They stood atop the ridge, not as cowards hiding from conflict, but as warriors defending what they loved most. Amarys turned to the wraith, whose coat billowed like a dark banner in the morning wind. His steel-tipped finger hovered near the hammer of his Colt, eyes scanning every crease in the canyon below. In that glance, Amarys saw not only the reflection of her own determination, but the echo of every man and woman who had fought by her side. "They'll come when they see the mist clear," she whispered. "They've lost their horses, their numbers. All they have now is pride." The wraith's nod was slow, deliberate. "Then we give them nothing but the truth of what hope can do." Below, the canyon floor lay thick with swirling dust rising in ghostly pillars, the last echoes of Mallory's retreat. And then, with a roar like thunder, they charged, 10 figures streaming into the pass, rifles raised, faces twisted by desperation and the last flicker of vengeance. Amarys planted her feet, hefted her shotgun to her shoulder, and exhaled, "Hold," until they're in range. Through the rising haze, the first outlaw stumbled over a sun-bleached rock. A split second of vulnerability, and the wraith's revolvers spoke. 2 sharp cracks that sent the man tumbling into the dust. Amarys recovered the rhythm of the fight. Inhale, exhale, aim, and fire. The shotgun blast claimed the second. Barton's bullets rained in from the side palms. Each shot a hammer on iron. The preacher's children aimed for shoulders, non-lethal wounds wherever possible, yet deadly if the outlaws refused to yield. At the center of the charge rode Samuel Reeves, the young gunslinger who'd once taunted Amarys in the saloon's shadows. His revolver barked, chewing through the air with reckless fervor. Amarys met his challenge. She sidestepped the blast, the hot wind ruffling her hair, and let the shotgun speak again. Reeves went down, eyes wide with astonishment, his horse galloping off as the earth swallowed him. The dust settled to reveal Mallory himself striding forward alone, pistol limp at his side. His men lay scattered, wounded, or fled only there. Flag caught on a gnarled bush, whipping in the wind like a tattered promise. He faced Amarys across the battlefield, boots sinking into the red clay. His hat fell back, revealing a face drawn tight with rage and regret. You beat me once, he growled, voice rough as gravel. But you can't break a man's pride. Amarise raised her shotgun, weary but unbowed. Your pride is the reason. You're alone. Mallory spat into the dust, the motion sudden and spiteful. You think you're so righteous? Saloon girl who turned killer? Legend's shadow? You're nothing but a scared woman who learned to shoot. Amarise's eyes blazed. She advanced a step. I'm the woman who chose to defend home, not to hide from fear. Mallory's hand twitched toward his pistol, but he hesitated, hands shaking as the memories of every fallen comrade flickered through his mind. The morning light revealed the frayed edges of his soul, desperation, grief, and the heavy cost of living by the gun. Amarise took another step forward, boots kicking at a spent shell. It ends here. Mallory's eyes flicked to the townsfolk standing behind her on the ridge, the preacher bowing his head, the blacksmith resting a hand on his rifle, the children gripping their weapons like talismans. In that moment, he saw the true power of unity, the unbreakable spirit of a community forged in adversity. He let out a long breath, ragged as a dying ember. Then, with a trembling motion, he kicked the pistol into the dust and raised both hands in surrender. Silence reclaimed the canyon. The only sound was the whisper of the wind through the stones. Amarise lowered her shotgun, relief coursing through her veins like warm blood. She stepped down into the pass, approaching Mallory with cautious grace. You have a choice, she said softly. Ride away. Never return, or face the law. Mallory knelt in the dust, head bowed. I choose the law. Behind them, the townsfolk descended the ridge, filling the canyon with footsteps that echoed like a new promise. The wraith strode to Amarise's side, hand on her shoulder, unwavering support in every line of his stance. Amarise offered Mallory her hand. He took it, rising shakily. Never underestimate a town that believes in itself, she said. He nodded, eyes meeting hers, a flicker of respect passing between adversaries. As the sun climbed higher, they gathered the wounded, tended the survivors, and lowered the black flag from the bush, replacing it with the banner of Redemption Hollow, a simple canvas bearing the image of the Silver Spur Saloon and the words, "Hope survives." Standing at the canyon's mouth, Amarise looked to the wraith and spoke the words that sealed her legend. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.